following is a presentation of TFNN. Mindful Living with Allie Ford and Tom O'Brien.
Sometimes I get a good feeling, yeah. I get a feeling that I never had before. No, I get a good feeling, yeah.
Call now, toll free at 1-877-927-6648. Internationally at 727-445-1044. Now, Allie Ford and Tom O'Brien.
Namaste and welcome to Mindful Living, everybody, where we share tips to help you and your family get healthy, feel good, and live life to the fullest every single day. I'm Allie Ford, yoga teacher and co-founder of GetMindWise.com, joined by my fabulous co-host, financial expert, author, and founder of the Tiger Financial News Network, Mr. Tom O'Brien. How you doing today, Tom?
I'm doing great. You having a good day? Totally. How can we not? This has been insane weather-wise. It's so gorgeous.
It is so gorgeous. It's usually smoking hot in Florida by this time of the year.
Right.
And right now, we ate dinner outside last night. All the windows are open.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so beautiful.
No humidity.
No humidity.
You know what's crazy is that waking up every day saying, it's so beautiful. I said to Nico this morning, I said, I can't, but it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing.
Everybody's in a better mood. It's hilarious. Strangers walking by, they say, hello, how are you? They take a genuine interest. You know?
Isn't that a beautiful thing?
It is. Yeah. Good weather brings the world together.
That's what Florida's all about. This truly is paradise.
It really is.
There's no doubt.
Yeah.
Blue skies.
Blue ocean.
Yeah. And
life is good.
And the water's, the Gulf is 82, 83 now. Now you can go swim in the Gulf all the time.
Yeah. And, it's funny. I mean, we all have our trials and tribulations, but we get through them, those hard times pass.
Right.
And it's important to get outside and appreciate beauty wherever you are, whether it's a walk in the park or just hanging out with some fresh air.
And the oxygen can do it and the trees can do it.
Yes.
There's no doubt.
Definitely.
Look up, folks. When you're walking, look up.
Definitely.
We don't look up enough.
That's true.
Yeah.
We often look down.
The stars grab me.
Mm-hmm. Be mindful. Be mindful. Pay attention. Our number is 877-927-6648. And today's show is all about healthy habits for teenagers and the teenage years. Teens are managing both internal and external changes, from raging hormones to learning self-acceptance, who they are and what they want, to how to communicate their will and express it to the outside world. It's no wonder it can be a difficult time. Now, you have raised two beautiful people, and they've both ended up turning out wonderfully. They are successful, contributing members of the society. So if you think back to the teenage years, do you remember it being particularly challenging?
What I saw is you can do the work. I think that one of the hardest things with teenagers is number one, you always got to tell them the truth. And one of the hardest things, tell them the truth. We're just talking about is like what we like as teenagers.
Yeah.
And what I've seen is that we're really lucky compared to, what our children have been.
Yeah.
Meaning, because I was out of my mind. So I'm still out of my mind, probably.
You're honest about it.
Yeah, so that was important. Mm-hmm. But what I had seen, and I say that to any parent right now, you have to do the work, but you have to get lucky too. Because I've seen some of my friends do the work, and oh man, then there's so many things that can go bad.
Yeah, it's so true.
And you can get them back. You know what I mean? But I've seen that, and that I can't. I still have a tough time trying to figure that out. You know what I mean? If you can get in with a bad crowd. There's a million things. I mean, kids now, they have bigger problems with prescription drugs. I mean, that type of deal we didn't have to deal with. We're dealing with pot or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And different deals. So there are different pressures.
Yeah.
The social pressures now, I can imagine, are amazing, because what I have seen happen is that. We had an after prom party at the house just last week.
Okay?
Oh
wow!
Yeah.
So fun. I remember the prom days.
Okay, so what I got to see there was intriguing, because you get to see just kids talking in general, and there's heavy pressures. I mean, what type of dress you have, and before, let's say when we were there, yeah, well, you're talking in a group. Well, now they're talking it's all text.
Yeah.
You know, with this, that. They had this on. They had, so
Everything's
you
in
better
your
make sure you have the right thing on. If you don't have the right thing on, you're in trouble.
Yeah, it is. It's just, well, that's part of the difference today. It's a different world with social networking and the internet. Everything's in your face. And, you know, I do feel like children more now than ever are bombarded with messages and advertising. And, you know, it's not to say that teenagers are always difficult. I think you hear both sides of the coin. I've got several friends who say it's the most joyous, wonderful time. It's exciting. It's fun. And at the same time, I've got friends with teenagers who say my kids hate me, and it's very challenging. And, you know, it's hard to watch them make some of the choices they're making. So I would say for anyone who's ever been confused or even angered by the behavior of a teenager, we'll have an expert join us today who try and help shed light on some of the challenges they're facing and give us some guidance on how best to help them through it. So,
yeah, well, you just brought up something cool, because what I've seen with teenagers, even myself, I remember I could drive my mother crazy. So, I can't stand it. But guess what? Ma, do you have any money?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you know, so it always goes back to that deal. No matter what happened, right?
Yeah.
It's like, Ma, oh, do you have this? Oh, do you have this? Do you have? It's want.
Yeah.
And that's normal. I mean,
think it is.
You know, and so there's a lot of things that I think have changed and haven't changed.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, I agree. Because it's, let's face it, you know, it's the changes we are going through as a human being at that time
Right.
of life, and things are confusing. I mean, what's going on with my body? What's going on with my skin?
Sure.
You know, I have to learn how to express
Right.
my personality. And as you say, we're still dependent on our parents, but we're emerging into adults and trying to learn our independence. And so it's a pull, push and pull.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
And of course, then you have all the cliques.
Yes.
You know, I want to be in that clique. I want to be in this clique. I want to be on this team. You know what I mean? That doesn't change.
The social aspect of things can be challenging as well. You know, and I don't have teenagers. I find this topic so interesting. I will. I mean, it's a phase that we're going to go through.
They're running around right now.
Because I have 2 young ones, and I always talk about this with my husband, that in general, anybody can have a child. I mean, there is allowed to have a child. But I think raising them and rearing them isn't always second nature. You know, a lot of people say, oh, we'll figure it out as we go. Well, luckily, there have been a lot of studies, and there are a lot of great resources out there to help parents. I think we do have some responsibility to do a little research, you know, and find out, how am I communicating with my child? Is it in a way that they're going to listen to me, or is it making them feel threatened?
Right.
So...
Right. Yeah, you want the communication.
Yeah.
Communication's huge.
So let's introduce our expert. Dr. Michael Smith, psychologist, is co-founder of Family Psychology Associates in Safety Harbor, Florida, and serves as the president of the Child, Adolescent, and Family Division of the Florida Psychological Association. He works with children of all ages and has a major focus on emerging adults ages 18 to 28. Michael, welcome to Mindful Living, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Allie.
Welcome, Michael.
Great to be with you.
Great to be with you as well. I love that you have this very optimistic approach. You work with so many children, and you also list some of their strengths that this generation of teens has, as well as some of the risks. So let's start with a positive and talk about what are the strengths that you're seeing in teenagers today.
Well, first of all, they are much more future-oriented than any previous generation. This generation has a number of different titles that have been attached to them. One is the Generation Z, following Generation X, Generation Y. They're also called the I generation, and some people call them digital natives because they have been raised on electronics, and so it's just intuitive for them to navigate around these different devices.
Do we know how, or if at all, that's affecting children today?
Well, it's affecting them in the sense that they're exposed to incredible amounts of information that can improve their educational outcomes. It also can pose a risk because early exposure to screen time, whether it's televisions or a tablet or a smartphone, can actually influence the development of the brain during the early stages of neurological development. So there are 2 primary periods where there is neurological exuberance. It's the preschool period when children are learning to master language and motor skills and the beginning of social skills. But we've also determined that there is a second period of neurological exuberance, and that follows puberty. So after the changes in the hormones of the body, there is a dramatic expansion of the neural network. And this also means then that the teenagers are particularly at risk for exposure to toxins, whether it is excessive electronics, or alcohol, drugs, nicotine, poor sleep habits, poor nutrition. So that can have a big impact on the developing brain. So while the opportunities to be exposed to all kinds of new learning avenues is one of the strengths of this generation, it can also be a risk.
Sure, and if you think about it, after puberty is when most children have their technology habits pretty firm. I mean, they're all on some type of device.
That seems to be their preferred means for communication. So long conversations occur in the form of texting as opposed to face-to-face conversations. You might want to have your listeners take a look at a short movie called I Forgot My Phone. It's available on YouTube. It's about 2 minutes in length. And it shows a day in the life of a young adult going through the different social encounters of her day. And unfortunately, she feels kind of estranged from the rest of her friends who all have their devices, and she left hers someplace else. So it's pretty humorous, but it's also a pretty sad commentary on how incredibly absorbed we can be in these devices.
True, and not just with teenagers. I mean, you hear adults say that, oh gosh, I forgot my phone today and I feel completely handicapped or alone or naked, you know?
Exactly, exactly.
Wow.
Now, one of the other strengths of this particular generation is that they have a desire to do something meaningful from the very beginning of their life. So we see a great commitment to volunteerism. They want to have a job that is more than just being in the drive-thru. They want to do something that has an impact. And so you have to kind of admire that.
Definitely.
And also, there's a great drive for independence. So this particular generation has ideas that are sort of setting them free, and it's partly because of their exposure to these to the World Wide Web, which is giving them the world at their fingertips.
Definitely.
When you say that they have a drive to do something, you know, great and independent, do they understand the type of work and education that they actually are going to need to do that?
Well, I think that there are a lot of students who do realize that, and this is why they're so preoccupied with their grade point average and their SAT scores and what school they can get into. So I had a student here this afternoon, and he was talking about how worried he is about whether he'll be able to get into the University of Florida. In my generation, you could stumble into the University of Florida.
Yeah.
And so now kids with a 4.0 and who are
it's huge.
the football quarterback, and they even have a legacy at UF and can't get in. So
no, you can see the social pressure. The social pressure to go to the UF is amazing. I mean, period. I mean, even when you're out, right? You know?
Right.
Yeah.
And then, unfortunately, sometimes once you get there, you realize, hey, this really isn't the place for me.
Yes.
So one of the things that I think is overlooked for teenagers is good vocational assessment. And this is one part of psychology which is more science and is art. I think a lot of what you do in a therapy consulting room is more artistic. It's based on science, but you kind of have to be able to be creative to make people engage. But one of the things that we do in our practice is we help teenagers and emerging adults understand where their niche is. And one of the best tools for doing that is vocational assessment. By the time a teenager is 14 years old, their vocational interests and aptitudes are fairly stable. We can map them using psychological instruments, and we can help them narrow the universe of possible careers to a more manageable variety of possible options. So there are 10,000 different careers in the Department of Labor's database, and it's just too much to be able to handle. So by psychological vocational testing, we can help them get down to 100.
All right, Michael, thanks. Such great information so far. We'll be right back with more from Dr. Michael Smith on helping teens navigate today's world. Stay with us.
In quiet markets, investors search for new trading opportunities. We'd like to introduce you to a new product that provides opportunities even in flat markets. Nadex, the North American Derivatives Exchange, is a new and innovative Chicago-based exchange registered with the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, and unlike most other exchanges, Nadex allows you to trade directly through them with direct market access when using their trading platform. Nadex never charges a fee to use their platform, which even includes real-time charts and full customization capability. Nadex's unique short-term binary options allow traders and investors to capitalize on strategies even when the underlying markets are quiet. Nadex's innovation has allowed them to come up with a line of unique trading products that are unavailable anywhere else. See how it works at nadex.com. That's NADEX.com, or click on the Nadex banner on the front page of TFNN.com. Futures and options trading involves risk and may not be appropriate for all investors.
We're told to follow our passion and everything else will fall into place. I hope that's what each of you are doing each and every day. Hi, I'm Steve Rhodes, host of the Money Master Show at TFNN.com, and my passion for technical analysis is what led me to the most fundamental discovery in pattern recognition, the Rhodes Momentum Indicator, market scanner, and trading strategy, a set of tools that identify the momentum and power of the trend, the likes of which have never been seen before, for every market and every time frame. Yes, folks, the trend is your friend, unless you're on the other side. New to technical analysis? This is the place to start. And experienced traders, take advantage of the trend like never before. Experience the power of the Rhodes Momentum Indicator each day, available to subscribers of my newsletter service, Mastering Probability. I guarantee your satisfaction for the next 30 days unconditionally, so there's no risk to you other than being on the wrong side of the trend. Mastering Probability, available on the homepage of TFNN.com. And folks, live with passion.
No matter where you listen to TFNN programming, we want you to know you can always access your favorite shows on demand through TFNN.com. TFNN airs live programming every market day from 9 a.m. till 6 p.m. Eastern, and you can view each program by accessing Tiger TV through our homepage. We even have an easy link for all mobile devices, including iPhones and iPads, located at the top right-hand corner of the TFNN homepage. You can't use your smartphone to view Tiger TV, but if you don't have a mobile connection that can keep up with streaming live video, then you can simply visit TFNN.mobi in the browser of your smartphone for live streaming audio of all of our programs. The mission of TFNN is to educate our audience directly and interactively through our interactive website and radio call and talk shows. TFNN is able to teach all levels of investors the technical skills needed to trade in today's marketplace. In order to get the best information possible, TFNN has assembled the most respected financial minds in the country to provide the most current news and comprehensive advice available. TFNN.com. Educating investors. Yesterday's gone. Tomorrow's not here. What are you doing right now? Mindful Living with Allie Ford and Tom O'Brien.
Oh, sometimes I get a good feeling, yeah. I get a feeling that I never had before. No, I get a good feeling, yeah.
Welcome back to Mindful Living. Our number is 877-927-6648. And today we're discussing healthy habits for the teenage years with Dr. Michael Smith of Family Psychology Associates. So, Michael, you were just we were talking about many of the strengths of today's teenagers. And Tom and I were chit-chatting at the break about the vocational assessment that you mentioned before the break. And we'd love for you to talk more about that. I'm curious what parents can do if they're not seeing a specialist like yourself to help students choose the right school.
Well, there are actually a lot of online resources that are available without any cost or low cost. So I'll share some of those with your listeners. First of all, the Department of Labor has a quarterly database called the Occupational Outlook Quarterly that surveys different occupations throughout the country and alphabetizes them and describes what they think is going to be the demand for those occupations in the future, what the salary range is, what the educational requirements are. So it's the Department of Labor Occupational Outlook Quarterly. It's free of charge. There's also a an online inventory called the Self-Directed Search, which only takes $10. And there, a student or even an adult in midlife transition can complete this questionnaire, and it will give you a 3-letter code that will explain about a person's interests. So interest could be realistic, investigative, artistic, social, enterprising, or conventional. So a psychologist, for example, is a combination of social, artistic, and investigative. And that kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
Yes.
So once you know what your code is, you can find all the related occupations. There's also a really cool website which is called College Career Life Planning. And it's a clearinghouse of hundreds of different sites that relate to vocational interests all over the Internet. Now, to understand how the puzzle pieces of vocational selection come together, you have to understand 4 different factors. One is vocational interest, so you can get that through the self-directed search. So I have an interest in basketball. Now, I have to also have the aptitude for basketball. That means I have to be able to jump, I have to be tall enough and fast enough and strong enough to compete. Frankly, I don't have those aptitudes. So when my high school years were over, so was my basketball career. You have to also have the personality characteristics that are appropriate. I was certainly very tenacious, and that's why I lasted as long as I did for a guy who's 5'7". And so finally, the last area is you've got to have the right fit between the nature of the work environment and the individual. So some people like to work around people. Others prefer working with data or information. So you have to understand the person-environment fit. So to get all those pieces together usually requires a consultant to help you pull those pieces together.
You know, when someone comes to you, doctor, it's really cool what you're saying, because they, you know, first take, whether it's a psychologist, I'm saying to myself, well, you know, what does the psychologist do, number one? And, you know, I have an idea what it does. But the aspect that when you're talking about, you can take anyone, basically, when we're talking about someone young right now, and you're getting them directed at this is what you may want to do. That's really cool, because that's the bigger picture. Do you know what I mean? I mean, everyone's always asking, what am I going to do? What am I going to do?
What am I
right?
supposed to do with my life? Which causes some deep, dark depression later in life, I think, for a lot of people.
Totally. Yeah.
Well, this is also a cultural issue. So in Europe, they track people in vocations much earlier, and they also then assign them to apprenticeships much earlier.
Yes.
And that also varies from country to country. So in Germany, there's almost 80% of all high school students who are going in a technical direction have an apprenticeship. In France, it's only 20%. In America, we're just now starting to build that infrastructure where we're trying to get people into meaningful training earlier on. And so the state of Florida is trying to put together some career resources that their high school students can access. And so they are also trying to get with the curve on that. In terms of the question of what a psychologist does, is what I do a lot of is what's called emotion coaching. I try to help people understand the nature of their emotional experiences, how their thought processes influence their emotional experience. So are they more optimistic or pessimistic, and how does that affect their feelings and their interpersonal relationships? I also try to help people develop conflict resolution skills so that they can communicate assertively, but also take the perspective of others. And so those skills are easily attained by certain individuals, but other folks, particularly children who have learning or developmental disorders, have a harder time mastering those skills. So they kind of have to be coached on an individual or in a small group basis. In our practice, we have a lot of social skills training that we do for kids who have learning disabilities or who are on the autism spectrum. And unfortunately, they need that more individualized type of instruction.
Sure. That's awesome.
And that sounds a lot like mindfulness and emotional intelligence.
It absolutely is linked together. So we also have mindfulness workshops in our practice, and we find that this is important not just for adults but also for children, because a large part of our ability to regulate our emotions comes from our capacity for self-control, for visualizing a positive outcome, for controlling our physiological reactivity. And so we teach kids relaxation skills, guided imagery, and we find that this is very, very effective. So that's why I was happy that you invited me to join you today.
Thank you so much. I have a question also about the tech-savvy generation. I'm just curious if caregivers or parents are ever concerned or bring up the concern with you about possible radiation from the use of cell phones and other devices.
Yes, that does come up, and so we are especially concerned about the use of technology, not so much in terms of the radiation, but more in terms of the impact on sleep hygiene. So many of our kids have their phones in their rooms and are not getting sufficient sleep, and this is affecting their REM sleep. It's affecting their slow wave sleep, which is the part of the sleep cycle where memory is consolidated. And so we have actually come up with some rules for the highway, the information superhighway, to help parents feel empowered to set limits on these devices. And so I think it's more of a concern in terms of their ability to set limits on these devices. And unfortunately, I think that we did not do a good enough job of anticipating how this could change our culture and the daily routines in our families. And now that these devices are out there, it's much more difficult to kind of rein them back in.
Yes.
And therefore, parents who try to set limits on use of the devices or when they're used or how they're used in order to avoid some of that radiation exposure, they are perceived by their teenagers as oddballs or control freaks.
Right.
And kids will basically say, well, nobody else has to live by these rules.
Right.
But keep in mind, it's your contract with the phone company, and it's your household, so feel empowered.
Yeah, you're bringing up a huge point. I had said to Allie a little bit earlier, it seems to me that the power of the young generation right now, we'll take them all the way up to 30, let's say, right?
Right.
Has absolutely, everyone is going to go towards them, meaning what I've found is myself, right? I just said to Allie, I can almost run my business on my cell phone. So this thing is getting so virtual that it's so real that it's like, oh my God, I'm realizing I might not text as long as some of these kids, but guess what? In the middle of the day, I can get a huge amount of production done. And I'm realizing, and this is accelerated like in the last year and a half. And I've watched myself and saying to myself, man, this thing is virtual. I mean, I could take on I'm sending you these kids right now. So it's really wild what's happening. I think it's happening to society, and I think this is one of these deals where the kids are going to not that the kids are going to overtake it, but that's where this world is going. I mean, it's going virtual pretty quick, and it's real.
Actually, that is one of the developmental functions of adolescence. They are the innovators of the culture.
Yes.
And so they serve as a conduit for new information and new ideas and new tools that enrich our family lives and keep us fresh and vital. You could think of teenagers as kind of an ambassador. They go out and they meet kids and they bring them home and you get to know them. And you are exposed to a whole range of behaviors that you might not otherwise experience if you're just dealing with your coworkers or your friends. And so that is one of the functions of teenagers. Unfortunately, when teens then have a detour and they become involved in groups that are less positive in their life,
yes,
then we end up with kind of a virus in the family.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
And so that can pose some serious risks.
Right.
So it's important to first understand, what are the developmental milestones of adolescence? What are the things that they should be trying to accomplish? And so one of them is to learn how to delay gratification, to be able to work toward a longer-term goal and not to just expect something immediately. Instant gratification is a part of our culture. You put a card in a machine and money pops out.
It's a big one.
Right.
Yeah.
You hear a lot of parents say that, not just parents, but particularly about children today, that they expect things instantly and easily, too.
That's exactly right. So we have to teach them that good things come for those who wait.
Exactly. And speaking of waiting, we'll wait and we'll talk more about this. It's so interesting. And thanks so much for being with us, Michael. We'll be back in just a minute with more on how to help teens today. Stay with us.
You take a hands-on approach to managing your investment strategy. You're always looking for the next trading opportunity to magnify your perspective. Direction Shares connects sophisticated traders with a powerful array of ETFs from a wide range of asset classes. The markets may go up and down, and you want tools for both sides of the trade. Discover how we can help at DirectionShares.com today. An investor should consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses of the Direction Shares carefully before investing. The prospectus and summary prospectus contain this and other information about Direction Shares. To obtain a prospectus or summary prospectus, please contact Direction Shares at 800-851-0511. The prospectus or summary prospectus should be read carefully before investing. An investment in the funds is subject to risk, including the possible loss of principal. The funds are designed to be utilized only by sophisticated investors such as traders and active investors employing dynamic strategies. Investors in the fund should understand the consequences of seeking daily investment results, understand the risk of shorting, and intend to actively monitor and manage their investments. Distributor Foresight Fund Services, LLC.
Who says you can't take it with you? TFNN says you can. With your mobile device and TFNN's live radio streams, TFNN has put it all in the palm of your hands. No special apps to download. No subscription fees for live radio or Tiger TV streams. We say you can.
Now let's go over to the dollar, because the dollar is going to be the generator. It is the generator of basically higher dollar, lower market. And what the dollar has done, and this whole uptrend, folks, has just gone sideways. The way it works, folks, is this.
We say you can. The Tiger Financial News Network. Smart investors and professional traders know you can. TFNN.com. Educating investors. Life is a mystery to be lived, not a problem to be solved. Mindful Living with Allie Ford and Tom O'Brien.
Oh, sometimes I get a good feeling, yeah. I get a feeling that I never had before. No, I get a good feeling, yeah.
Welcome back to Mindful Living. We're at 877-927-6648. Michael, you were talking about the developmental milestones for adolescents today, and you mentioned delayed gratification or learning to delay gratification so that they can have longer periods of focus.
Correct.
Okay.
Also, we have to teach our young adults how to improve their frustration tolerance. We're dealing with much more complex social environments. There's traffic problems, and there are problems with technology and problems with bureaucracy. So life is about difficulty and how we handle adversity. We have to also help them understand that rather than simply complying as they may have done as a child, as an adolescent they need to learn how to negotiate with authority figures, but they have to do it in ways which are appropriate and display good emotional controls.
Yeah, and what about respecting authority figures as well? I definitely see a difference there. I mean, when I was a child, we said, yes, ma'am, no, sir. Today it's, yeah, huh, what? You know, it's just different.
Well, I think that those are habits that are learned in the home environment, and so those types of social skills have become sort of a lost art, unfortunately. And so it's important for parents to try to look at the standards of conduct that we are expecting and try to elevate them some so it's not just the peer culture.
Right.
We have to also teach our teens how to collaborate because we live in a networked world. So very few people now work in isolation. They usually work as part of a team. And therefore that requires perspective taking, and it requires problem-solving skills and conflict resolution skills. And then finally, we have to help them consolidate a sense of identity. It's kind of ironic that when you see teenagers who are looking so much to fit in, that the actual number one priority in terms of their development is to figure out how they are actually unique. So we have to help them figure out where their strengths are. And every child has an island of competence, and we have to help them discover that. So I think that if we can try to give them sort of an inventory of themselves, then they'll have a much better chance of finding out where they fit in their young adult lives.
You know, Michael, you've been in this business about 25 years, and what have you seen changes in the last 25 years in teens?
Well, we're seeing a significant increase in autism spectrum disorders. It's now about 1 in 68 births.
I see.
We are seeing an increase in anxiety. If we talk about the teenage population, 25% of teenagers meet the diagnosis for an anxiety disorder at some point during their adolescence. It's also important to realize that anxiety is the number one emotional experience of parents of teenagers because they're moving out into the world, they're beyond your control more, you have a lot more risk that they are exposed to, and sometimes the news is not good.
Right.
So we have that issue. We're seeing an increase in mood disorders. So if we look across the country, we're seeing the prevalence of ADHD, anxiety disorders, autism spectrum disorders, and mood disorders are all increasing. Some of this has to do with better diagnostic tools. Some of this has to do with genetics, because people who are vulnerable to learning or emotional difficulties tend to attract others who have a genetic predisposition to the same thing. And then there's questions now about environmental exposure. Maybe it's power plants, maybe it's the water system. I think these things we have to look at and have an open mind that there could be some environmental factors that are affecting the increased incidence of these disorders.
Now, when you get into this business, how did you develop your foundation?
Well, I actually began as a volunteer in 1974 at a mental health center in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where I was in undergraduate school. I was a VISTA volunteer, which means Volunteers in Service to America. I was able to get course credit for volunteering. And I was fortunate that Dr. Alan Goodwin took me under his wing and gave me opportunities that I would have never imagined. And so I was able to then complete my undergraduate degree and go to work for that mental health center. I then decided to go back for graduate training and trained at Georgia State University, and then did my internship at Rutgers and had opportunities to train with some of the best family therapists in the country.
You can see it. I'm telling you, you know, the only job I ever had, when I got out of the Marines, no, that ever worked for someone. When I got out of the Marines, I worked for the BU Psychiatric Clinic for 2 years. And I lived with kids. I used to take them out of the court system. And so that was the only exposure I really had. But I was in the city, and these kids just needed a couple of boots in the butt and a lot of love. You know what I mean?
Right.
But I love your foundation, man. You know, it's so common sense, but I can see how what you're talking about can build real character, real soul, and real spirit, you know?
When you talk about mindfulness for teens and children, do you have favorite tools or books that you can share with our listeners?
We actually use a lot of things that are published by New Harbinger Press or Imagination Press. So Imagination Press is an imprint of the American Psychological Association. That's imagination without the I in front. Not sure why they called it that. And you can go to their website and look at the books that they have. And New Harbinger Press has been around 25 years. It's out of San Francisco. They have a tremendous volume of self-help books. And so that's a good resource as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
There are a couple of books that are specifically related to the teenage years that I think could be helpful for your listeners. One is called The Primal Teen, and it's by Barbara Strauch, S-T-R-A-U-C-H. And it basically talks about that period of neurological exuberance and how toxic exposure can affect that development.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting point. It came up on one of our previous shows with an expert, a nutrition expert, who said that, you know, sometimes when we start to allow our teenagers to take a sip of alcohol here or there, and we feel like we're helping them because they're staying home rather than going out and driving and doing this, he said that that's causing, it causes brain damage.
Well, it can certainly, with people who have other vulnerabilities, it can certainly have that effect. I don't know if I would call it brain damage, more of a brain programming. It's sort of training the brain to seek that particular substance. The other one, which is kind of interesting, is called iBrain. It's by Gary Small, who's a neurologist from UCLA. And he talks about how early exposure to electronics can shape the actual development of the brain. And one of the things that we're seeing is this increased social isolation and lack of social interaction. And so there seems to be a direct relationship between excessive screen time and diminished social skills, a more sedentary lifestyle, more obesity. So there's kind of a vicious cycle of gaming and the impact on our physical and mental health. Now, one tool that I think is really important to understand is how do you communicate with your teenager. And one of the ironies here is it's not so much what you say, it's how you listen. And so I would recommend a book by Adele Faber and Elaine Maslich called How to Talk So Teens Will Listen and Listen So Teens Will Talk. And what it basically outlines is 4 simple principles that help you be a better listener so that you validate what your child is saying. You don't have to agree with them, but you can acknowledge that their perspective is legitimate. You can then listen for the feelings that they're trying to express. Oftentimes kids talk about anger or being annoyed or irritated or frustrated, but underneath the surface of that annoyance may really be hurt or isolation or disappointment or shame, and we have to help them get to those feelings. And then you can teach them problem-solving skills so they can think more flexibly and not get stuck in the same old patterns of behavior. And then finally, if they feel like you have listened to them, they might be more likely to listen to you.
Yeah, I said listening for everyone, you know, is a big deal, right?
That's true.
I mean, sometimes, you know, you think you're listening and you're really not listening, and then, you know, the person will actually tell you what they were thinking. It's like, oh my God, why wasn't I listening?
Yeah. Well,
and it's right in front of you.
Yeah, and also the multitasking problem. I mean, we're talking so much about technology. Not that I don't mean to make it out to be this terrible thing, but, you know, oftentimes we'll ignore our children, not just while we're texting or emailing, but while doing the dishes or, you know, we're preoccupied with something else when we really should try and give them our full attention.
Yes, unfortunately, because of having dual career couples, because of parents who are dealing with raising kids following divorce, we're having a lot less time together to share meals and to communicate with each other. And oftentimes people have their devices with them or the TV's on in the background. We have to turn the screens off and sit down and be face-to-face so we can really get to know each other again.
Right. You know, you mentioned the sedentary lifestyle, and it is a fact that obesity amongst younger people is on the rise. What do you suggest there? I mean, how do you get people up and moving?
Well, it's one of the things that I think we tend to encourage. We can't force people to do it, but it is part of the goal-setting process in my first session with people, and I look at the interface between physical health and mental health. I believe that we should all seek to exercise every day because we know that we won't be able to achieve that goal, but we'll be much more likely to approximate it if we have that as our first goal. There was research done with medical students, and they found that those who had the goal of 3 exercise sessions per week usually averaged 2. Those who sought to have 6 exercise sessions per week typically had 5. So the outcome is much better if we try to make it part of our everyday routine.
Right.
And then, of course, nutrition is critically important. We need to be mindful of the substances that we're ingesting through the foods that we choose, and we have to be aware that processed food is high in sugar, salt, and fat, all of which are triggers for eating more of the same stuff.
Right. It's addictive.
How does basically the pharmaceuticals come into play with teens?
Well, actually, pharmaceuticals can be a mixed bag. In our practice, we do have quite a number of children and adolescents who have learning and attention disorders, who have mood disorders. that are no fault of their own.
Yes.
They had a genetic predisposition, and they may require medication to reach their full potential.
Right.
However, then there's the off-label use of medications from Adderall to Oxycontin, which are used for recreational purposes. And unfortunately, pot is so pervasive now, and the access to all kinds of different pharmaceuticals is so widespread that it's becoming normalized in our high schools.
Yeah, and it's so powerful, right? I mean, when sometimes when you think, or I said to Ali earlier, I mean, years ago you grow up with pot. That's one thing, and we all can argue whether you go on from that and anything. But when I see these kids now, is that all of a sudden you take one of these pills and they're so powerful, it's like, whoa, you know.
Well, it's not even just the potency of the medication, but it's really the pervasive-ness of it. It's so widespread.
Okay.
So peer pressure is not, hey, man, if you want to be cool like us, you need to take this.
Right.
It's just seeing how widespread it is, and it just seems to take the avoidance away from trying these things.
Okay.
Yesterday in one of my schools, in a middle school, someone brought an e-cigarette, and it was, sort of being traded around the classroom.
Yes.
And some of the kids didn't even know what it was.
Right.
So it's just your guard comes down because it seems to be so normal.
Mm-hmm. And you also talk a little bit about speaking of normal and being more pervasive, the attitude about sex amongst young people today.
Well, yeah, we live in kind of a hookup culture, and the definition amongst teenagers of what constitutes sex may be a direct relationship to the Clinton administration, but so the reality is that the hookup kind of culture, it makes sex much more casual, and the unfortunate thing there is that then it detaches it from intimacy and from commitment. And one of the most scary things is the rise in HPV. It's primarily in the heterosexual population, and it may take 5 years for HPV to become apparent. So kids who are involved in casual hooking up may be transmitting this virus unknowingly.
Well, I know we're going to talk a lot more next week on communicating about all of these things with our teens. We've got one of your colleagues coming on, Dr. Ben Snyder, which is just going to be so helpful. But with that in general, I mean, I personally, I have young children, so I'll be discussing sex with them in the next few years, I'm sure.
Sure.
And that's the first thing I want to say is, do you know about the STDs? And they're just so crazy and shocking, but that, who knows if that's the right thing to do. That might push them away,
No, I think you have to first begin with sexual changes of the body, so body hair and changes in tone of voice and perspiration, those sorts of things. And there's a great book called It's Perfectly Normal that provides parents kind of a guidepost for how to engage in that conversation. So once you've talked about changes in the body, then you can start to talk about changes that happen when people begin to have romantic feelings.
Okay.
And then you begin to talk about the context for expressing those romantic feelings, which is going to be in the context of a committed relationship. And then you can talk about the dangers from there. So we don't want to lead with the dangers, but the dangers need to be part of the conversation.
Okay, great. Yeah, I don't want to scar my children, so thanks for that.
I don't think it's scarring. I think that's the anxiety again. So the typical emotional experience for parents of teens is anxiety, and this is probably the most anxiety-provoking area.
Yeah.
There's no doubt.
It definitely is.
Right.
I mean, I'm anxious already in my
parents,
got
not
years.
for the kids.
Right. Well, that's what, Dr. Smith is saying.
Right.
I mean, and surely, when you think about the energy, children are, younger people tend to be beacons of energy. They feel the energy in the room. They can tell when we're stressed and we're anxious. And
that's exactly right. And actually, one of the ways that they communicate their feelings is what I call emotional hot potato. So they don't actually necessarily express what they're feeling, but they make you feel it.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so the next time you're starting to feel intense emotions, you might ask yourself, is this their way of projecting their feelings into me so I get it?
Oh,
That's pretty cool,
That
actually,
is
right?
so
that's,
profound.
That's pretty smart of them. That's good. Period.
It definitely
But
is.
it's not intentional. It's not conscious. It's unconscious.
Wow.
Right.
And so as a conscious parent, what you want to be doing is paying attention to your own emotional response.
Yes.
Listening for their language, trying to take it to a deeper level where it's more vulnerable, where it's about the tender feelings underneath, not the anger on the surface.
Sure.
Because usually when kids are angry, it's because they're scared, because they are nervous, because they are feeling isolated. There's something else going on.
Man, I want to hang out with you, man. I want to have a few beers.
I would feel like I'd have a little bit more luck on my side. And I think that is important, because I do have so many friends with teens now, and I hear them so often say, my children hate me. But it's important to say, all right, what is going on underneath that? They don't hate their parents. There's some situation that they need to be probably dealing with aside from those emotions.
Well, actually, what's often happening there is that the child is afraid of the separation process. They know that they're facing a world that is overwhelming, and they're leaving the security of their family. So one of the ways they propel themselves toward independence is to act as if they don't need to be dependent at all on their parents by rejecting them and criticizing them and focusing on their flaws. And so this is why we don't let teenagers be judges, because they're quite absolute in their decisions and their way of perceiving things. And so basically, if you see your child pushing away, it may be because they're afraid of their own ability to function independently.
Such good
Awesome.
insight, yeah.
Huge information.
Good advice, good insight, and thank you so much for all the tips and tools and the books. I'll continue building my library today. And, we're just so grateful that you've spent this time with us. So
It's my
thank
pleasure.
you. Have a beautiful evening.
Thank you so much.
Michael, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good night now.
Good night.
Good night. So next week, I'm looking forward to talking to, as we said, one of Dr. Smith's colleagues. His name is Ben Snyder. He'll be spending some time with us on really getting into how to communicate with our teens about all of these
It's a great foundation.
issues.
It's amazing, when the communication skill that Michael has, laying that out, because it's clear, concise, and you can run with it.
It's insightful.
Yeah,
it
it
is.
is.
You
It
know,
is.
and as parents, sometimes, as you said, we get caught up in the emotions. And oftentimes like children ourselves. And I think that the more that we can be.
That's good with kids ourselves.
Yeah.
That's a good thing.
The fun part of that is a good thing. I
That's a good
agree.
thing.
I agree.
Yeah.
So I think the more that we can be understanding and open and conscious, I love that he used the term conscious.
That's a fact.
Of
Right.
what's happening in their life and why they're feeling what they're feeling.
Right.
And be mindful of those things, that the better parents will be.
It's a beautiful thing.
Beautiful thing. So we want to thank you so much for joining us for this edition of Mindful Living. Join us next week for more on how to communicate with teens. And until then, we wish you health, wellness, and beauty from the inside out. Namaste.
Namaste, folks. Have a great one.
This is TFNN.